At this point, Dr. Corrales and Dr. Rotrock discuss the initial interview.
This is a fairly typical first interview where we really focused on what the problem is. And just briefly, we see the family struggling with what we call a responsibility problem, where father thinks that the son is basically irresponsible, and mother is still concerned about the responsibility, but she believes that, protective as she is, her son is in fact doing things semi-responsibly.
We see this as a preferable frame compared to a so-called sick frame, where the boy's behavior would be seen as somehow sick or disturbing, sometimes phrased more gently as an indication of low self-esteem or some problem that's more internal to the boy. So we see the frame, i.e. the responsible frame, as an easier one to work with and one that has a better prognosis for success than a so-called sick frame.
Partly because it can be verified. If he gets better grades, then we will know it. If he's studying, we will know it, which is a little bit more difficult than, say, the boy is emotionally disturbed.
In terms of the function of the symptom, of Jimmy's symptom, we saw it as having two main functions. One was it had the function of bringing in father, and we had a sense that the father was quite distant, tended to work all the time, and that, but once Jimmy got into difficulty, into trouble, then that tended to bring father in rather rapidly to try and help Jimmy or to correct Jimmy's problem behavior.
They got him into the web of the emotional fabric of the family. And then the other function that I saw was that typically the arguing as a sequence would start between mother and father, and then, although it was about Jimmy, and eventually when father got heated up enough, and Jimmy would step in, and then the heat would be between father and son, thus detouring some of the real heat between husband and wife or father and mother. And in that sense, it had a fairly significant function for the system.
I agree. It's also in a very classic type of triangulation that if you're doing private practice or agency work, you'll see this kind of problem time and time and time and time again in your office. It's a sort of problem that it's sort of a mainstay, I guess, of therapists, where it's somewhat of a classic triangle where father and mother, or rather the son and mother, are allied with father out.
And with the heat being on one side of the triangle, in this case, mainly between father and son, after an initial heating of the husband-wife relationship. And not very much into the limelight here, but somebody we need to be aware of is the older sister, Jenny, who probably has some kind of a covert but significant tie with father.
You might note the way we're thinking about the symptom or the problem, and there are many ways always to think about a particular symptom or a problem. And we're thinking about it here in terms of threes, in terms of father, mother, and Jimmy. And consequently, the type of intervention or solution that we will use later will involve all three of them. So we're conceptualizing or thinking about Jimmy's problem outside of himself. We're conceptualizing it as a relationship type of problem between mother, father, and Jimmy.
Now, the area that strategic therapists will utilize quite a bit in formulating a treatment plan is the area of sequence of behavior, or the solution to the problem. And you'll notice that whenever Jimmy gets into any kind of a situation, part of the sequence is father will talk to mother, mother will start to sugarcoat a little bit and protect the son. Father then increases the investigative quality of his questions. Somewhere down the road, he'll find out that something went wrong, either through the school, juvenile court, or mother might slip out something, or Jimmy might slip something out. And then he'll start to use what we might call the big stick as a way to solve the problem, and mother then protects the boy, trying to provide a lot of the softness. And so when mother provides the softness, father probably wants to get more punitive, When father wants to become more punitive, mother provides more softness, and thus the boy is not only caught up in the triangle, but has a way to nullify the effect of the hierarchy.
It's interesting because clearly the father was the one who was most upset. However, my hunch is that initially it was the mother who would be upset by some problem behavior of Jimmy, but her own anxiety then would be transferred to the father. This is not terms that strategic therapists would use, but her own kind of dissatisfaction would then be transferred to the father simply by telling him in tidbits what Jimmy was doing. And the father then would, of course, get very upset and go through the sequence that you just elaborated on, Ramon.
So in summary, our main goal here in doing the treatment plan would be to find a way to unify the hierarchy so that they can do their work in a manner that is still respectful and compatible with their own understanding and belief.
That we want to somehow break the destructive sequence of behavior and offer them more constructive solutions to solve Jimmy's problem.
An important part of strategic therapy is the giving of directives to the family on the part of the therapist, part of the initial interview. Here we see the therapist engaged in such a process.
We know that there are several concerns in the family. The one we'd like to focus on, primarily because we believe that this is what you're concerned about, is Jimmy's schoolwork. And we would like to share some things with you that we believe would be helpful to Jimmy, and we will need a lot of your cooperation to do that.
Our thinking is that if Jimmy can get some success and do better in school, it'll be a pretty clear sign that he's doing better in life in general, and that he'll be more responsible. It'll be a pretty good indicator of his increased responsibility. And what we'd like to do is propose something, and then we'd like to ask you if you're willing to do it between now and the next time that we would meet again. We're hearing that the two of you have different styles in relating to Jimmy. That's
an understatement.
And maybe along that line, different solutions as to how you feel like it's best to help Jimmy at this stage in his life. And what we'd like to do, Marie, is to go with your style first and ask you between now and the next time that we would meet in 2 weeks, if you would be willing to give Jimmy lots of attention, love, care, consolation, whatever you feel like that he needs in order to do better in school. Mm-hmm. And we're assuming that if your method then is effective, that what we will see is increased study on Jimmy's part, which would eventually translate into improved grades. Mm-hmm. Okay? And at the end of the 2-week period, and we'll say more about the specifics of this in just a moment, but we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of your solution. And if it should not be effective, we would then like Mike to go with your solution, which would be maybe a little tougher than Marie's, and have you try your method to see indeed which one is best, because we see both of you have the same goal in mind, which is really to help Jimmy do better in school. Are we correct about that?
Sure.
That you really want your son to do better in school?
Your style, Mike, as I understand it, is that if Jimmy could have more specific consequences for all of his wrongdoing, that you believe he'll do better.
Absolutely.
And we want to hear that very, very carefully, but are asking you, are you willing to let Maurice's solution for at least 2 weeks? Would you be willing to give it a try?
Well, does this mean that he has no discipline for the next 2 weeks?
Well,
Is that
maybe
basically
we'll
what we're
hold
talking
off.
about here?
We'll hold off on that until we're through with our instructions. But maybe I'll just leave that for you to think about for the moment. Okay. Now, what this means, Marie, I hope we're making this clear, is if at the end of the 2-week period, when we get back together here, if there is absolutely no evidence that Jimmy is doing better, and that will be decided by the two of you as parents and by the two of us as therapists. We will review the information of the previous 2 weeks, and if we as a group decide that Jimmy is indeed doing a little bit better, then we'll continue with your solution. If there is no evidence that he is doing better, our task would be that you must then agree to let Mike follow his own nose. And then we would give him a chance for the following 2 weeks to utilize his solution. This is part of the agreement, too.
Are you willing to do that for the next 2-week period?
Surely, will certainly be willing to try anything. I guess, am I understanding, though, that there would have to be an improvement in grades in 2 weeks? That's kind of
Not
hard
grades,
to...
not
Okay.
grades, but studying. If he's studying, if he's bringing his books home, if there's evidence that he is actually doing the work that down the road might get him better grades.
Okay.
During this 2-week period, Mike, we'd like to ask you to observe Jimmy's behavior especially close, to see if he is indeed bringing books home, studying. It's okay to be a bit of a snoop. Would you mind to do that when you're home?
No, it's
To watch, but don't comment on Jimmy's study habits.
no comments.
No comments.
Either
Just observe.
Just
Yeah.
observe.
no comments to Jimmy, and in order to keep her solution in a purified form, you're not to make any suggestions to your wife about how to handle Jimmy, only during the next 2 weeks.
How about information? Can I get information?
Not directly from Marie, just through your own observation.
We'd like to ask in that vein, Marie, if you would not report to Mike anything about Jimmy the next 2-week period.
Okay.
Could we ask that you do that?
Sure. Actually, that's better for everyone.
Okay. The other thing that we'd like to ask you to do, Mike, is that for you to spend a little bit of time with Jimmy, one time this week, one time next week. Some short amount of time that would just be contact, friendly contact.
And Marie would like for you, if you would, please, to coach Jimmy a little bit on, maybe give him some tidbits on how to get along with his father, because I think he needs some help in that area. And as a final thing, very important for us as therapists is during the next, while we're working with Jimmy here, that the two of you agree to put your marriage on the back burner and totally concentrate your energies on helping Jimmy.
So that all your focus for now will be here. Could we ask you to do that?
Sure, that's why we're here, really.
Would that be all right with you, Mike?
We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
A brief discussion of the family assignment or directives follows.
What we were attempting to do in this brief intervention period with the family, one of the things we were attempting to do, I should say, was to block the behavioral sequence that we observed during the initial contact with the family. And we were wanting to do that by eliminating essentially the function of the symptom, and also by rerouting it. So we were attempting to block father's involvement and to begin the early stages of a healthier kind of connection and contact with his son.
One of the ways we blocked the symptom or the behavioral sequence was by asking father simply to observe Jimmy and not to make comments directly to Marie, because that's how the whole interaction sequence started. And in terms of eliminating the function of the symptom and rerouting it, we tried to get a task whereby father and son, with mother's help directed to the son, whereby father and son might do something more on a friendly basis. Now, frankly, we're a little pessimistic about whether that can actually happen. But whether it happens or not, it will be information for us that we can utilize then in the following session.
Our hope would be that by having father as an observer and blocking his direct conflict with his son, this will give him enough interest so that he'll stay involved. And in addition to that, that he could look forward to